our partner organizations. In this mission, the delegation of the Congress of Regional and Local Authorities of the Council of Europe, led by Ms. Gubdarni Vinakayan, and the delegation of the European Parliament, led by Ms. Marta Tamido. And I acknowledge also the presence of other colleagues from the delegation here with us. Let me also, first of all, thank the authorities of North Macedonia for inviting us to observe these elections, as well as the state institutions, the political parties, the candidates, the media, civil society organizations, and of course, the people of North Macedonia who welcomed us to this beautiful country. Today, we are presenting our joint statement of preliminary findings and conclusions, which summarizes our assessment of these elections. And this statement is based on the work of our long-term observers who have been deployed throughout the country since early September, as well as over 250 short-term observers who yesterday observed polling stations in every region and municipality. With this statement, we assess the extent to which these local elections in North Macedonia complied with OSCE commitments and other international democratic standards, and of course, the national legislation. So I will now present the statement. The 19 October local elections were competitive, providing voters with a genuine choice from a range of political alternatives, but they took place in a highly polarized political environment, including along ethnic lines, and against the backdrop of disenchantment with politics and widespread perception of corruption. While the election administration generally managed local electoral preparations efficiently, inconsistencies and gaps in the election legislation, as well as limited resources and outdated infrastructure, adversely affected some aspect of its work. Fundamental freedoms were largely respected, and candidates were able to campaign freely. But instances of misuse of public resources and allegations of voter pressure and intimidation were of concern. Although candidates largely campaigned on municipal issues, the process, led predominantly by political parties, was marked by national-level debates on identity, EU integration, corruption, and the rights of ethnic communities to equitable representation. Legal provisions for political advertising, including in the media, disadvantaged independent candidates and non-parliamentary parties, and unduly excluded smaller parties with a parliamentary group. Campaign finance transparency was negatively affected by systemic legislative shortcomings and the limited capacity and enforcement powers of oversight bodies. Women remain underrepresented in public and political life, and gender equality received limited attention during the campaign. Election day was generally calm and orderly, but some procedural shortcomings were noted. So what I just read is the first paragraph of the statement of preliminary findings and conclusions, and let me now add some additional remarks. Elections in general in every country are a vital moment for every democracy because they allow citizens to choose their representatives. These elected officials are the decision makers who shape how our societies develop, and North Macedonia is no exception. And local elections are a crucial component in a democracy because mayors and city council members elected at the local level make many decisions that directly affect citizens' lives and essential services. The legal framework continues to provide a basis for democratic elections in North Macedonia, but it contains a number of ambiguities and inconsistencies. Public funds constitute a significant share of campaign financing, but systemic legislative gaps and the limited capacity of oversight institutions reduce transparency and hinder effective control. ODIHR's media monitoring showed that the media landscape remains pluralistic, but fragmented along political and ethnic lines. While overall coverage was balanced, smaller and non-parliamentary contestants had limited visibility, and some had no access at all to paid political advertising due to the state reimbursement formula. With regard to participation, persons with disabilities were able to take part in the process, but accessibility remains uneven. Although most polling stations were equipped with some accommodation and assistive tools, more than half did not provide independent access for voters with physical disabilities. These findings illustrate a process that was professionally organized and competitive, but still marked by systemic gaps in the legal framework, unequal campaign opportunities, and persistent barriers to full inclusion in political life. With this preliminary statement, we value the opportunity to share our expertise to ensure compliance of elections in North Macedonia with OSCE commitments and international democratic standards. And we know that upholding these standards improves the quality of democracy and increases citizens' trust in institutions. The ODIHR mission will remain in the country to observe the remaining stages of the electoral process, including the official announcement of results, the handling of possible post-election day complaints or appeals, and second rounds of the mayoral elections. ODIHR's final report, which will be published in a few months, will include detailed recommendations for improving further elections. It is our hope that these recommendations will be taken seriously as part of the ongoing efforts to strengthen democracy in North Macedonia. Finally, our mission would have not been possible. They helped us carry out our work not only in the capital, here in Skopje, but also from Tetovo to Ohrid, from Prilep to Kočani, from Kumanovo to Bitola, from Strumica to Veles, just to mention a few of the many municipalities where we have been present. I also want to acknowledge the important work of civil society organizations in this country, which over many years have worked to promote democratic, human rights, and electoral reforms, including through domestic electoral observation. Unfortunately, for these elections, their observation, as many of them are now facing financial challenges that limit their ability to continue their vital work. Supporting their continued engagement is crucial for ensuring inclusive and transparent elections also in the future. I thank you for your attention, and thank you, Katia.
Thank you very much, Matteo. We now move on to Gopnitny Viharaim, who heads the Congress delegation.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I also wish a very warm welcome to the joint press conference of the International Election Observation Missions. The Congress of the Council of Europe very much appreciates the cooperation with our partners of the OSCE, ODIHR, and the European Parliament during this mission. I also thank the authorities of North Macedonia for their invitation to observe these local elections. I was pleased to be head of the delegation of the elected members of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities. The Congress is one of the political assemblies of the Council of Europe, responsible for strengthening local and regional democracy in its 46 member states. It represents over 130,000 local and regional authorities. It regularly observes local and regional elections in the Council of Europe member states and beyond. Congress members who observe the elections are local and regional elected representatives themselves. This peer-to-peer mechanism allows us to observe electoral processes in our member states and to monitor the application of common democratic standards at sub-national level. On this mission, our delegation comprised of 15 observers coming from 14 countries. We observed voting procedures in close to 72 polling stations across the country from opening until closing. In addition, we followed the counting process in 7 polling stations. The Congress delegation also held preliminary meetings on the 17th and 18th of October with a wide range of key stakeholders, including the election administration, the media, NGOs, the State Secretary of the local self-government, and candidates and representatives of the various political parties, plus independent candidates. I fully concur with Matteo Macacci has just said. We welcome the fact that election day was well organised and it was assessed positively by Congress observers, and we congratulate the election management boards. Voting was calm and orderly, and we were pleased to see the peaceful manner in which it was conducted after a competitive campaign in which a wide range of parties and candidates were motivated to participate. We also welcome that since the last Congress election observation mission, election board members have received a higher standard of training, which has increased the operational capacities of the electoral management boards, alongside their positive efforts to enhance the use of biometric identification. There were technology glitches with those machines, which we saw at first hand, and we hope that these can be addressed for the next election, helping to ensure that the starting time is always observed and procedures are not interrupted. North Macedonia is ahead of many other European countries in adopting this technology, and it's well worth every effort to further improve it. Similarly, we saw that some voters needed help to ensure that they put their ballot papers in the right boxes, as the distinguishing colours of the forms were quite pale. We recommend looking at how the distinction can be made even clearer. We were also pleased to see widespread provision of voting booths for people with disabilities. But we regret that most polling stations were not fully accessible to voters with mobility impairments, despite ongoing efforts by authorities. The authorities should increase their efforts to ensure greater access in practice and as a matter of priority. These are not just procedural points. Addressing them will ensure an even smoother election day and further enhance all voters' experience. Another positive point is the introduction earlier this year of a definition and register for online media outlets. This is intended to improve transparency, complementing the requirement in the Electoral Code for fair media coverage. However, we regret that the current rules around parties' allocation and purchase of media airtime has resulted in the effective exclusion of smaller parties and independent candidates. The absence of local media, particularly outside the capital, is also a major issue, limiting coverage of local issues, which should be central to a local election campaign, and contributing to the prominence of national topics, further polarising the electoral environment. We are concerned that several of the recommendations made by the Congress following the 2017 local elections have not been addressed. Certainly, the legal provision supporting gender balance on candidate lists has resulted in the consistent election of women to more than 1/3 of council seats. However, the situation for mayoral candidates is very different, where there is no mechanism to ensure women candidates. This exacerbated by the reality of gender-based violence and intimidation, including physical assault and hate speech online, means that women remain drastically underrepresented. All political parties have a role to play in addressing this. No woman should have to weigh her safety against her right to stand for elections. So, the low number of women mayoral candidates and the lack of accessibility for people with disabilities and older people remain serious concerns when it comes to inclusion. The Congress also previously recommended paying further attention to the accuracy of the voters list. It is clear that this remains an issue within the country. Equally, we heard widespread concern about the misuse of state resources in the lead up to the elections in the context of a widely shared perception of corruption. Certainly, this election campaign showed the way in which local issues can be crowded out by national debate in a highly polarised and politicalised environment. This is to the detriment of local voters and their needs and their rightful expectations, including the country's youth, many of whom are deeply disillusioned. More generally, I take this opportunity to say that yes, vibrant local democracy requires the highest election standards, of course. But it also needs a virtuous circle of good governance, institutions and services that meet local needs and actively engaged people and civil society organisations. The European Charter of Local Self-Government, ratified in North Macedonia, helps countries to achieve that and is monitored by the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities across the 46 Council of Europe member states. We look forward to working with the country's authorities at every level in the months and years ahead to build on the progress that has been made. Following this mission, we will prepare a report together with recommendations addressed to the authorities of North Macedonia. This will be presented for adoption at the Congress session in Strasbourg next March. Once again, I thank all the members of this joint international election observation mission and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Finally, we turn to Marta Temido, who heads the delegation from the European Parliament.
Thank you so much, Katia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned, I am Marta Temido, and I'm honored to address you on behalf of the European Parliament Election Observation Delegation. Our delegation from the European Parliament is comprised of myself, Mr. Carlo Hessler, Mr. Pierre Pompi, and Mr. Nicolas Farantouris, 4 members from 4 countries representing 4 political groups. We came here as part of the ODIHR International Election Observation Mission. Before proceeding with our impression on the elections, I would like to thank the Macedonian authorities for the invitation to observe these important elections, all the political parties, the independent candidates and the civil society organizations that we met in the last days, the EU ambassador and the heads of missions of the EU member states present in Skopje, Mr. Matteo Mecacci, head of the OSCE ODIHR Election Observation Mission, Ms. Gobnit Mumniukam, head of the Congress of Regional and Local Authorities of the Council of Europe delegation, and all their staff for their support and contribution to the success of the mission. Last but not least, let me thank the Speaker of the Sobranie, Mr. Afrim Kashi, who confirmed the solid, long-standing working relationship between our 2 assemblies. Our delegation fully subscribes to the statement of the preliminary findings and conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission. The European Parliament observed elections in North Macedonia in 2002 and 2016 and 2024, while in 2020 we could not come due to the COVID pandemic. But this is the first time we observe local elections. This is not common practice for the European Parliament because normally we do not observe local elections. So this is a strong sign of commitment of our institution, which considers North Macedonia and the region of Western Balkans a top political priority and therefore eligible for getting support in all areas of mutual interest, including election observation, rule of law, capacity building, human rights, and mediation. Now, let's come to our findings for this first round. During our stay here in Skopje, we listened to all our interlocutors with interest and attention. Although European integration was not a central campaign issue, we understand from most of them that a majority of parties and communities in North Macedonia remain committed to EU membership. We therefore suggest to the newly elected local authorities to advance their country's reform agenda. On a less positive note, we must observe that most ODIHR recommendations of previous election observations are still outstanding. For example, the issue of the voting register. Also, we acknowledge that some interlocutors expressed fear that there have been some irregularities, possible misuse of state resources, pressure on public employees, intimidation of voters, and that all this can happen again for the second round. I will now say a few words about Election Day. On Sunday, yesterday, our delegation observed the vote and the counting in many cities. One team was in Skopje, including Zentar, George Petrov, Chair, Butel, with another team visiting Tetovo, Gosivar, and Kičevo. Our observers noted a high degree of dedication among staff at election boards, including in rural areas. While the voting process itself was smooth, with citizens casting their ballots freely and in a peaceful atmosphere, we observed several procedural challenges. These include minor irregularities during the counting process, such as a failure to follow the prescribed procedural order. Furthermore, while operations were generally transparent, the tracking of voters and family voting were recurring activities in or near most election boards we visited. Technical issues, such as slow functioning of the biometric voter identification devices, were also noted. A significant concern was the widespread lack of accessible facilities for persons with physical disabilities. In conclusion, we express our support for the Macedonian political forces to implementing the democratic reforms it has started in recent years, including on the Constitution. We further encourage a robust and sustained fight against corruption, a destabilizing force that threatens the integrity of the nation's democratic institutions. We encourage the new local authorities to focus on core local issues, answering citizens' calls for better living conditions, a lower cost of living, clean air, and a strong stand against corruption. We firmly support the aspirations of the Macedonian people for a prosperous future and a swift integration into the European Union. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to you for your attention. There's time now for your questions. I'd like first to emphasize that while you're all very welcome here today, this is a press conference and we will only be taking questions from journalists. I'd therefore be grateful if you could begin by introducing yourself and your media outlet. The lady here, please go ahead. Okay, thank you.
Since you are here, you have met with political parties, important political parties. What is your impression, or what is the explanation that the political parties gave to you, why that they don't implement all the recommendations given by ODIHR?
Thank you. Maybe I'll take the question since this is regarding the ODIHR recommendations. I mean, the focus of this mission was to observe the upcoming elections. So the work that is being done on the recommendation, which has been issued, as you know, over a number of years, is not done at this moment. But this is something that I think our institutions has continued to encourage. And we also can acknowledge there have been attempts in the past. Even in 2024, there have been some electoral reform and some recommendations were implemented. As you noted, some of them are still outstanding, and it is our effort to continue to work with all political actors to try to implement them. One important element of our work is that we believe that for electoral reform, the process needs to be inclusive. And inclusive means having the participation and the input of all political forces, but not only. Also civil society organizations and citizens at large. Because when we are talking about elections, we are not talking only about some policy choice of a government, whether economic policy, environmental policy, or financial policy. We are talking about the basic rule of democracy. So this is something that should see the participation and the input of all the people who are participating, which are the political parties, the citizens, civil society organization, the media organization. So sometimes it's difficult to reach the consensus of all, especially when the climate is polarized. As we have stated, the climate in this election was very polarized. So discussion on, finding common ground was not really on the agenda. Of course, we hope that in the future, also with the issuing of the new final report, we will be able to find the space and to bring everybody at the table to make the voice heard, and then to finally implement some of these reforms, which will increase the quality of democracy and citizen trust in institutions, which I believe is very much needed.
Yes, please, the lady here. Yes, please, if you could wait.
Hi, I'm Ilona Gagovska from Buren. And you mentioned that there were problems with the accuracies of voting lists, and on social media there were maybe a dozen people who complained that their dead parents or their dead relatives were found on the voting lists. Did you observe something like this in the polling stations where you were monitoring?
Based on our observation yesterday, we didn't come across anyone who was deceased on the voting list. No.
One thing I can mention, there is a general concern about the accuracy of the voter list, which is connected to the number of people who are still registered in the voter register, but are no longer living in the country. And this is an issue which has been ongoing for a long time. In this case, in order to be able to vote for these elections, you have to be resident. So if you're not resident in the municipality, you don't have the right to vote. So as we know, there are some cases where not all the people are living where they are still resident, and although we understand that this is part of an ongoing effort. So one of our recommendations was to try to look into this topic, and as we've done in other countries, to do a general audit also of the voter register to assess the accuracy. Regarding the dead people, it could be that if the voter list has not been recently updated, it might have happened, but I don't think we have seen that directly with our observation either.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions from the floor, in which case we will leave it there. The report, as well as the press conference in all 3 language versions, are available on your way out and are also published on ODIHR's website. Thank you very much again for your interest.